October 29, 2018, Lion Air Flight 610 lifts off from Jakarta. 13 minutes later, it's gone. 189 people, buried in the Java Sea. The world called it a tragedy. Boeing called it pilot error. But there were engineers inside that company who already knew, who had flagged the system, who had been overruled. This is not a story about a plane crash. This is a story about an empire so dominant, so certain of its own invincibility, that it stopped listening to the only people who could save it. Boeing didn't fall because Airbus was better. Boeing fell because Boeing forgot what it was. And Airbus was there, patient, precise, and ready to collect the wreckage. This is Rivalry Files. Classified briefing begins now. Imagine you build a machine that changes the world. Not once, every decade. The Boeing 707, commercial aviation is reborn, jets replace propellers, the world gets smaller overnight. The Boeing 747, the jumbo jet, a flying city. Crossing the Atlantic stops being a luxury. It becomes ordinary. By the early 1980s, Boeing doesn't have competitors. Boeing has customers. Airlines that want to survive buy Boeing. Full stop. The 737, the 757, the 767. Each one a masterpiece. Each one more profitable than the last. Seattle becomes the center of the aviation universe. Engineers rule the culture. Precision is religion. Safety is doctrine. And at the top of that doctrine sits one unwritten law. If a Boeing engineer says it flies, it flies. That law held for 50 years, until it didn't. European aerospace is a disaster. The British have their planes. The French have theirs. The Germans have theirs. Each protecting a different government, each losing. Individually, none of them can touch Boeing. So they try something dangerous, they collaborate. In 1970, Airbus Industry is officially born, a consortium, a coalition of 4 governments, half corporation, half political project. Boeing's response? Laughter, full institutional laughter. A European committee building airplanes? Good luck. The jokes write themselves. 4 countries, 4 bureaucracies, 4 languages. What Boeing doesn't see, what it refuses to see, is that Airbus isn't trying to beat Boeing at Boeing's game. It's designing a different board, different rules, different weapons. And while Boeing laughed, Airbus went to work. The A300, Airbus's first commercial aircraft, 1972. Boeing executives examine it. They shrug. It's fine, it won't sell. They're right, at first. The A300 is a commercial struggle. Airlines don't trust a committee plane. But then something shifts. Eastern Airlines takes a chance. They lease 4 A300s. The economics are undeniable. Lower fuel burn, lower maintenance costs. They order 25 more. Suddenly, other airlines notice. Boeing still doesn't blink, because Boeing is still winning by comfortable margins with comfortable profits. And that comfort, that slow institutional comfort, is the first crack in the foundation. Empires don't fall in an instant. They rot from the inside, quietly, for decades. Airbus launches the A320. This is the moment everything changes, not because it's prettier, not because it's cheaper, because it is fundamentally different. Fly-by-wire, no mechanical linkages between the pilot and the control surfaces. Everything is electronic. Computers mediate every input, every correction, every decision. To Boeing, this is heresy. Pilots need to feel the plane. You don't put a computer between a pilot and the sky. To Airbus, this is doctrine. Fly-by-wire means precision. It means a modern narrow-body jet that any airline can operate efficiently, safely, profitably. The A320 doesn't just sell, it dominates. By the early 1990s, the A320 family has hundreds of orders. Boeing is forced to respond. But Boeing's response isn't innovation. Boeing's response is optimization. That distinction will take decades to matter, and then it will matter enormously. Boeing acquires McDonnell Douglas. On paper, a triumph. Boeing absorbs a rival. The headlines are glowing. Boeing wins again. But McDonnell Douglas doesn't just bring planes to the merger, it brings a philosophy. McDonnell Douglas had spent years on the brink of bankruptcy, survival mode. Every decision filtered through one question: how do we cut costs fast enough to still exist tomorrow? That philosophy walks through Boeing's doors in 1997, and it doesn't leave. The McDonnell Douglas executives rise through Boeing's ranks because they know something Boeing's engineers don't: how to package decline as efficiency, how to sell cost-cutting as strategy, how to make Wall Street love you while you quietly hollow out the machine that built the empire. The engineers who built the 747 are still there, but they are no longer in charge. The accountants have arrived. Boeing moves its headquarters from Seattle, the city where the planes are built, to Chicago, away from the engineers, away from the factories, closer to the financial district. The message is clear. Boeing is no longer an aerospace company that happens to be publicly traded. Boeing is a financial asset that happens to make planes. Between 2013 and 2019, Boeing spends $43 billion buying back its own stock. $43 billion. Not on R&D, not on next-generation aircraft, not on the engineers who could have built what comes after the 747, on stock buybacks, to inflate the share price, to trigger executive bonuses. Every dollar spent on buybacks is a dollar not spent on the machine. And the machine, the physical machine that keeps 300 people alive at 35,000 feet, is beginning to show the neglect. Airbus announces the A320neo, new engine option, same airframe. New engines, 20% better fuel efficiency. American Airlines is already negotiating. Boeing's nightmare, losing American Airlines, one of their most loyal, most lucrative customers, to a European consortium. The board doesn't want a new aircraft program. That takes a decade. That costs $20 billion. So they do something faster. The 737 MAX. Take the 737, a plane designed in 1967, mount new, larger engines, promise airlines they won't need new pilot training, promise them the MAX is essentially the same aircraft, certification, fast-tracked, development costs, minimized, delivery timeline, aggressive. Boeing sells 5,000 planes before a single one has flown. The financial logic is flawless. The engineering compromise is quietly buried. MSAS, maneuvering characteristics, augmentation system, a software patch hidden inside the most advanced version of Boeing's most successful aircraft. Here's the engineering problem. The MAX's new engines are larger. To fit them, Boeing mounts them higher and further forward on the wing. This shifts the plane's aerodynamic profile. Under certain conditions, the nose pitches up. Left uncorrected, the plane stalls. MCAS is the solution. It reads a single angle of attack sensor. If that sensor triggers, MCAS pushes the nose down automatically, without pilot input, without pilot knowledge, without a backup sensor. One sensor, one command, maximum force. Pilots are not told about MCAS in their training. It doesn't appear in their flight manuals, because if it did, airlines would have to recertify every crew member. And Boeing has promised, in writing, that the MAX requires no additional training. 346 people are now flying on a system their pilots don't know exists. October 29, 2018, Jakarta, Indonesia, Lion Air Flight 610, 6:20 a.m., the 737 MAX 8 lifts off. 12 seconds into the flight, the angle of attack sensor malfunctions, MCAS activates, the nose pitches down, the pilots pull back, MCAS overrides them. The nose pitches down again. The pilots pull back harder, MCAS fires again. 21 times in 12 minutes, man versus machine. Machine wins. At 6:31 a.m., Flight 610 impacts the Java Sea. 189 people gone. Boeing's initial response: pilot error, inadequate training. The Indonesian crews, not the aircraft, not the system, not the undisclosed software. Investigations begin. The MCAS documentation surfaces. The internal emails start to leak. And Boeing's lawyers get very, very busy. March 10th, 2019. Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. Ethiopian Airlines Flight 302. 4 months and 11 days after Lion Air. The same aircraft type, the same sensor failure, the same software activation, the same override sequence, the same result. 157 people, 35 nationalities, gone. This time, the world stops. Because this time, they cannot call it pilot error. The Ethiopian crew is among the most experienced in Africa. They followed Boeing's emergency checklist exactly, to the letter, and died anyway. Within days, China grounds every 737 MAX in its airspace. Europe follows, Australia follows. Then, 3 days after the crash, under extraordinary pressure, the FAA grounds the entire 737 MAX fleet worldwide. Boeing's CEO goes on television. He calls it a tragedy. He says the plane is safe. He says the system worked. That system. What happens next is not a recall. It's an autopsy, congressional hearings, internal emails subpoenaed, documents released. And those emails are devastating. This plane is designed by clowns, who are in turn supervised by monkeys. That's a Boeing engineer writing to a colleague in 2017, before either crash. Another email: would you put your family on a MAX simulator trained aircraft? I wouldn't. Engineers knew, middle managers knew, senior leadership knew, or chose not to know, which, legally, is exactly the same thing. The 737 MAX is grounded for 20 months, the longest grounding in aviation history. Boeing absorbs a $20 billion financial hit. The CEO is fired. The FAA is restructured. By 2024, the Department of Justice charges Boeing with fraud conspiracy. 346 victims, $500 million in compensation. No executives go to prison. The empire survives, diminished, exposed, and still, somehow, in business. Today, the numbers tell the story Boeing wishes it could suppress. In 2003, Boeing delivered 281 aircraft to Airbus's 305. It barely registered. By 2019, the year of the grounding, Airbus delivered 863 aircraft. Boeing delivered 380. Airbus now holds approximately 56% of the global commercial aviation market. Boeing holds 44% and falling. The A320neo dominates narrow-body sales. The A350 is taking wide-body orders that once belonged to the 787. Boeing's next-generation aircraft, the 777X, is delayed again. Meanwhile, Airbus is already designing what comes after the A320, with a culture that still believes in engineers, with a supply chain not hollowed out by buybacks, with a safety philosophy built on redundancy, not concealment. Airbus didn't win because it was smarter. It won because Boeing handed it the victory, decision by decision, year by year, dollar by dollar. Here's what Boeing's story actually teaches, not about aviation, about power. Every dominant empire carries within it the seed of its own overthrow, not planted by the enemy, planted by the empire itself. The moment Boeing chose shareholders over engineers, it chose short-term optics over long-term survival. The moment it moved its headquarters away from its builders, it severed the nerve connecting strategy to reality. The moment it hit a safety system from the pilots who needed it, it didn't just risk lives, it ended the era. Airbus didn't defeat Boeing with a better plane. It defeated Boeing with patience, with a long-term technological bet, with the discipline to think in decades, not quarters, and with the wisdom to let an arrogant empire destroy itself from the inside. The lesson isn't Boeing's failure. The lesson is this: dominance is not a destination. It is a discipline. And the moment you stop practicing it, someone is already counting your days. Rivalry files, classified,